Okay, it's 10 a.m. Caribbean time. So welcome everybody, good morning. Thank you for joining us in the Alliances for Action webinar series. We are organizing these webinars under the framework of the Alliances for the Caribbean Coconut Industry Development in the Caribbean. This is a project funded by the European Union and in partnership with the CARDI Forum Secretariat, the ACP Secretariat, and then of course, with the collaboration of our valuable partners in the region as the Caribbean, the CARDI, the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, EDF, and all the ministries of agriculture in the region. And this is the second edition of the webinar. Last week, we had the participation of Caribbean Export and CARDI. We were discussing the topic of branding and marketing, especially during COVID times. And next week, we will talk about food trends. And this will be in partnership with our partners of JAMPRO in Jamaica. So today, we have the pleasure to have the presence of Marike Pena from CLAC. This is the Latin American, the Caribbean network of Farmers Union. Also, we have Josephine from Liberia, representing the Farmers Union Network of Liberia. And then, of course, the Executive Director of CARDI, Mr. Barton Clark. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Katia Esbenson from the European Union delegation in Barbados. Thank you for joining us and supporting the regional industry in the Caribbean. Well, as you might notice, we are all muted at the beginning. So we will have a Q&A session in the end. If you have any questions, you can please put them in the chat and maybe we can address them during our presentation. But we will have an open Q&A session in the end for a more interactive session. This webinar and the previous one is being recorded, and both of them and the following ones, they will be put in the website of CARDI and ITC, of the Coconuts website, and also in CARDI's YouTube channel, in case you want to go back, and also the presentation will be uploaded for your review. If at some point you feel that the connection is being disrupted, so we would advise to turn off the camera so you have more quality in the video and in the audio. So we will begin first with my dear colleague, Sarah Charles. She will be presenting very briefly a report with it's titled Unsung Heroes, which basically is a recapitulation of interviews of our alliance partners around the globe. Let me, unmute Sarah. She will be giving a brief introduction of the report. In the meantime, also to inform you, across the webinar, we will be launching some polls, some surveys. So we would appreciate if you could answer the polls just to have a bit of interaction as well. So Sarah, over to you while I put the first poll on to everybody know who is present in the webinar today.
Okay.
Do you see the poll?
Yes, I see it.
Good. So please, everyone, if you could see which of these areas of the value chain you are representing today, so everybody knows who is the audience. Okay. We see a lot of support institutions. So it's good that we will have more policy implications and we can help our farmers in the region after this seminar. So we have 80% of the votes. I will end the poll now and share the results. As you can see, we have a good representation of support institutions in the region, plus farmer associations. So Sarah, please, over to you.
Thank you, William, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see such a big turnout. So I'll be presenting a report that ITC Alliances for Action recently published. Some of you may have read it. This report is called Unsung Heroes, How Small Farmers Cope with COVID-19. It was written by Jorge Walter, Hernan Manson, who's here today, and also Jorge here today, I believe, and myself. To the next slide. So here I've made a word map which highlights the key shocks and related impact points and also responses. So we have COVID-19 as the main shock that we're talking about today, but this has added itself on to existing crises, a climate crisis and a price crisis that are already shocks that the farmer community worldwide is dealing with. We see issues such as health, finance, transport, food security, cost of doing business, and economic recession. The latter is a very important one, especially for the Caribbean region, also for African countries, while health has been a bigger issue for European countries, for instance. I think the biggest issues that we're dealing with in the Caribbean region and African countries are the economic recession, also many Latin American countries. The lockdown has brought many businesses into bankruptcy. Access to finance is becoming increasingly difficult. These are shocks that are difficult to bounce back from. Then in green, these are the responses. So we see a pattern emerge of responses. So we have survival, emergency resilience, long-term growth, and competitiveness. So all of this relates back to small farmers and MSMEs in the agricultural sector. The COVID-19 pandemic highlights that the global food supply is built on the shoulders of farmers and agricultural workers. Without them, the world would struggle to overcome the pandemic, as we would be less food secure. This report relays the message of smallholder farmers on COVID-19 impact and recovery. It provides insights on what support they need from all value chain actors, and it builds on 14 interviews with partners of the International Trade Center's Alliances for Action program, partners from food value chains in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, Central and Latin America, and Europe. So these are the voices behind the report. We structured our report around their feedback rather than feed their comments into our report. This is really important. We really wanted to relay a message here from the global farmer community. If you look at the table on the left, we have these are the farmer organizations that we interviewed. Banelino, in the Dominican Republic, representing 3,000 people from the farmer community. Benchmargi Coffee Farmers Cooperative Union, representing 13,250 smallholder farmers. The Coconut Industry Board in Jamaica, with 800 coconut farmers. The Farmer Union Network in Liberia, with 55,000 farmers. Kwapo Cocoa Cooperative Farmers and Marketing Union in Ghana, with 100,000 cocoa farmers. The Latin American and Caribbean Network of Fair Trade Small Producers and Workers, CLAC, with 355,000 farmer members. And finally, Protocop in Nicaragua, with 10,000 people. So we feel that we have a good representation of the farmer community worldwide addressed in this report. And here we have the list of names, people who are kind enough to provide us with their insights on not only impact, but also how they're dealing with the crisis, how they're coping, and their plans for the future. Sorry, I'd also like to add that apart from the farmer community, we also interviewed the industry to get a better rounded perspective. So also on the buyer side of things. So we had Niche Cocoa in Ghana, List and Beisler in Germany, Max Havelaar in Switzerland, and Chocolat Halber in Switzerland also. So first we looked at the main impact. So the main impact, COVID-19 impact reported on producers are the four you see outlined here: transport, costs, demand disruptions, finance and investment. So as I said before, small producers are already grappling with the triple shock of sanitary, environmental and economic challenges. And they're also the most vulnerable. The global pandemic hasn't initiated a crisis for them, but rather it's deepened existing ones. Governments across the globe have imposed lockdowns and regulatory measures and curbed travel to contain the spread of the virus. And for small farmers in developing countries, this has meant threats to health and food security, particularly food security, rising transport and production costs, huge logistical bottlenecks, input ruptures, drops in demand, sometimes increases, and uncertain cash flow and access to finance. So all of these issues have led to and contributed to economic recession, import-export disruptions, increases in costs of doing business, cash flow issues, supply and demand and labor disruptions, price volatility, income issues, food insecurity, health vulnerability, and new regulation standards and policies. So a lot of small issues that lead to much greater shifts overall. So when we interviewed all these people, a pattern emerged from the answers that we received. We tried to translate that pattern into a sort of strategy framework, an analytical framework. And this is our Alliances for Action COVID-19 response framework, let's say. First, on one hand, we have resilience. So emergency response today. This is more about survival. This is the column on the left side. And on the right side, we have overcoming adversity. And this is more about a recovery response. So this is more about growth in the long term, or in the midterm at least. So it's really about surviving the crisis and long-term economic growth. So I'll go through these in detail. So here, in the short term, resilience and survival. We identified 4 key areas for emergency response. The first being protect health and nutrition of farmer cooperative members, especially senior workers. So yes, applying all the health measures, the face masks, providing guidance and equipment to the agricultural workforce is important. Also, making sure that they're food secure as well. And it's important to note, because it says here about senior workers, that a large percentage, in most countries, a large percentage of the agricultural workforce is senior. And as you know, senior workers are more vulnerable to COVID-19, so this is also an issue that the farmer community has had to deal with. The second point, build a solidarity network for farmers' welfare around social support and food supply. So here it's a lot about the farmer organizations who already provides a lot of these elements to their farmer community, but they've really had to step up their, anything, making sure that they have transport to get to the farm, making sure that they get paid ahead of time so that they can get through the season, making sure that they have other crops to rely on so that they can feed their family. These are all part of that solution. And the third one is to keep the information flowing both ways for coordinated private-public response. This is very important. We saw that in particular in the Caribbean when we interviewed Barton Clark, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. But they have very good communication channels in place where they relay the information from top to bottom and vice versa, so they know where the gaps are in the region, how to address them. They keep monitoring data in terms of, because of the disruptions in imports, checking on where the gaps are, what needs to be covered. This is a very important point. And finally, reaching out to bankers, buyers, and policymakers and renegotiate terms. So I would say this is last but not least. This is a very important one. This affects cash flow. This means that you need to renegotiate new emergency terms to adapt to new emergency circumstances. You just can't continue business as usual. And then in the midterm, it's all about recovery and growth. So once you've applied those emergency measures to survive, you then need to look beyond the crisis and see how you can continue to thrive. So again, we identified 4 key areas. The first one being diversify to multiply, mitigate and adapt to environmental, health, social, and economic risks through integrated climate smart production. So basically, this is all about, you can't just rely on your cash crops. You need to make sure that you have food crops, agroforestry. Diversification makes it easier to adapt to climate change, and it means better soil quality and productivity. And diversified crop production also improves livelihoods and the welfare of farmers by mitigating income risk, ensuring food security, and improving household nutrition. So they don't, for example, if it's cocoa, they don't just have the cocoa for export, they also have other crops for home consumption and maybe to sell at the local market for some extra income. The second point, adopt a multi-channel strategy. This is a very important one. Diversify markets and channels and explore value addition at domestic and regional levels. This helps generate better returns, more income streams, by targeting several market channels at the same time, focusing on local economies as well as export, and branching out into new products. This can bring in more customers while diversifying market and price risk. So a multi-product, multi-market approach is key. The third point, strengthen value chain alliances for investment, innovation, and equitable value distribution. So investments by buyers, financiers, and the public sector in adaptive technology could help farmers become more efficient, scale up productivity, and increase their incomes. And a relationship of trust and transparency between buyers, producers, and value chain operators can also reduce the asymmetries that exist now in the distribution of profit. So we'll talk about that later, but in the future. But post-COVID-19 is also an opportunity to look at these asymmetries and change the dynamics. And finally, digitalize. Explore new market platforms and more efficient workflows and bridge the gap between producer, buyer, and consumer. So digitalization of working procedures and new online delivery platforms enable producers to get better organized. This means they can reach local, regional, and international markets and win new customers. And it also responds to the growing demand for responsible production and consumption and bridges the gap between producers, buyers, and consumers. Because if you're online, the consumer suddenly is a lot closer and you can share a lot more and everything becomes a lot more transparent and personal and direct. And finally, in the future, so perhaps this aspect we sort of opened up the report at the end to this, but didn't discuss it much. So now we're looking at a new normal, or are we looking at a new normal in production and consumption? I hope that we are. In agribusiness, economic transformation must translate to sustainable returns for smallholder farmers and MSMEs that contribute to food production across the value chain. However, farmers and farmer organizations can't do it alone, and their voices are often not represented at all, or they are, but they're not heard. So that here collective action is key. Sustainable, productive and commercial alliances engaging individuals as well as associations, institutions, businesses and policymakers. Everyone needs to be involved to really trigger a change. Also, there's a shift in consumer mindsets, increasingly challenging the status quo. Consumers are starting to value the people who produce their food and they want to hear what they have to say. So we're really at the dawn of a new normal. And these are the questions here on the right. You see a list of questions or areas that might be part of this new normal. So local and global. What does that mean? That means, yes, it's important to export. Yes, global is important, but it's also about looking now at the local food chains. For example, in the Caribbean, small island states rely heavily on imports. And Barton can tell you more about this later, but this has been an issue now suddenly with the restrictions on transport. So they're now looking at local food chains. How can they become more self-sufficient? It's all about becoming more self-sufficient now, which brings us to food sovereignty. Circular sustainability and new business models. Again, sort of, waste reduction, more sustainable farming practices, from farmer level to processing level, very important. Alliances and public-private partnerships, leave no one behind, so it's all about collective action. New definition of value, the impact of your purchase and the story behind it. So this is about the shift in consumer mindset, more or less. It's like people are now understanding that when they buy something, they're not just buying something, they're effectively investing in good or bad. So it's becoming increasingly important to demonstrate, what your product is contributing to. People want to invest in good, mostly. Contactless economy. So this is related to health. Now when you pay with your card, you sort of hover it to pay. You go to the restaurant, the menu is on a tablet. Things are becoming increasingly paperless, contactless. Is this going to be the new normal? Is it here to stay? Climate resilience, food secure cropping systems, what I was talking about before, crop diversification, more food security and nutrition security. Food health and safety, also very important. New models for tourism. Are we going to see new models for tourism? People going to travel, for example, to the Caribbean, they'll no longer be going just to see the pretty beaches, but maybe they'll be traveling to experience the culture, to taste the food. So cultural and culinary tourism seem to be becoming increasingly important. And finally, youth and skills development from job to craft. It's about upgrading skills, training the youth so that they're no longer just, for example, making sandwiches, but they become food artisans. They learn a skill, and that means that they offer a service of higher value and also get an income, a higher income. So these are all important points that we hope are going to shape a new normal post-COVID. And finally, I'd like to leave you with these images. These are the unsung heroes of our global food chains and of the COVID-19 crisis. This is why we wrote the report. I've met most of these people. We have Lemlem, John, Dorcas, Jenny, Maria. These are the people for whom we need to change business as usual. And I leave you with, we'll be sharing the PowerPoint after this session. I've included the hyperlink to the publication if you're interested in reading it. And also our Instagram, where many of the farmer stories are included in our Instagram feed if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this very important insight from all our alliances partners across the globe. Most important to see what will be the response after COVID. And for this, of course, we have the pleasure of joining us Marike de Pena. She will be explaining about the impact that COVID-19 has had in the Latin America and the Caribbean, but most importantly, what are the opportunities for this new normal. So welcome, Marike. While I put your presentation, let me launch the second poll. We have two questions here. The first asking which area is currently affecting you the most of the COVID impact. So there are two questions: which is the area that is affecting you the most, and the second area that is affecting you the most. So if you could please, do you see yeah, go ahead. I see the answers are coming. If you can please fill out the poll. Well, I put the presentation of Marike here. So we have in the post the areas that are affecting you the most during the COVID-19. We have access to finance and investment, disruptions in internal and external logistics and transport, health and food safety, lack of markets, reduction in demand, input supply, and increase of doing business. So we have two questions. The first one is which of these areas has been affected the most, and then the second one that has been mostly affected. I see the responses coming in. I will give 30 more seconds to allow for the other participants. Okay, I think I'll end the poll here and share the results. So here, Marike, before your presentation, you will see there is the areas of being affected are very spread out across the room. The most important one here, according to the survey, is the disruptions in internal and external logistics, and of course, the implications in health and food safety. So Marike, please, over to you. You're still muted, Marike. There you go.
Yes, okay, here I am. Thank you very much, William. I will put off my screen because of the sound quality. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar and to reflect on the coronavirus and its impact on farmers and workers worldwide. That during the crisis really have been committed to food safety, even when this means putting their lives and the lives of their family at stake. But if we really want to understand the impact of Corona, we also need to understand that in the Global South, Corona hits farmers and workers that already struggle with crisis during decades. And although the current interest of consumers and businesses to support farmers and workers is really heartwarming, we also need to understand that change in the way we produce, trade, and consume our food is needed to tackle the structural causes behind poverty and exploitations and to achieve the SDGs in post-COVID era. Please go to the next slide, William. Okay, to understand the pre-coronavirus crisis where many farmers and workers are in, we need to understand better the value distribution in supply chains. This value distribution has deepened the crisis that Corona have put on farmers and workers due to the very unequal distribution of value in major commodity supply chain. So a study of Oxfam and Basic, the ones that you see now on the screen, shows that over 80% of value of major commodities are captured by businesses, processors, and retailers in northern countries versus less than 40% by agro-input companies and farmers and workers in the south. So if we evaluate then the trends over the last 10 years in value distribution, we see that agro-input companies have been able to increase 72% of their value, but farmers and workers have lost 26%, and retailers have gained 12%. So the gain of agro-input companies is worrying, as this means more pesticides to control diseases and push productivity at the short time, but at the same time destroy soil health and the medium term, and creating a dependency of farmers on agro-input companies. So farmers' income have been under pressure, as you can see, but in the same decades that farmer income have been declining, market expectations have been increased. Food now needs to be safe, produced with the highest respect for the environment, pay living wages, respect human and labor rights. So on the one side, farmers are receiving less. On the other side, the cost of production have increased during the last decades. Higher expectations with a lower income put farmers under pressure, affect the sustainability of farming as well as decent livelihoods, and make that young people are not willing to step into agriculture. One of the reasons, as Sarah already said, that many of our farmers currently are over 57 years old. So the future needs to change if we want to end hunger, poverty, and secure food safety. The question is, will coronavirus wake up the current world and motivate change? Next slide, please. So if we go a little bit to see what happened in coffee and bananas, which are the major crops we export in Latin America as fair trade. Sorry for my Skype, is coming in and out. I'm not sure if you heard that. So what we can see that prices falling are below the cost of production. We have seen the crisis in coffee last year. It has been in the newspapers that coffee ended up with below $1 a pound, and the cost of production is $2 a pound. And if you see your picture on the right, we see how a major retailer in Europe is really selling bananas at the lowest price. So on the one side, we have seen a decrease in prices even below the cost of production, which have negative consequences on environmental and social externalities. What you see below are true studies done on the true price and true cost of production, and the cost you see reflected there are the costs not covered by price producers receive. The green ones are environmental costs, and the red ones are, let's turn off my Skype because it's getting interfered. Sorry for this. Sorry, so I'm back. The green one are the environmental externalities, and the red one are the social externalities. So what we have seen due to the fall in prices, that the environmental externalities in coffee and banana have increased because of the use of pesticides, land and water, but also the social externalities still exist. We talk about child labor, forced labor, gender-based violence, and low income. If we then see what can be done through sustainability schemes, and that you see on the left, is that you definitely can reduce environmental and social externalities through standards and producer support, but they won't go away. they still are there. So on coffee, we can see that there has been a reduction due to sustainability schemes that producers are supported by standards to produce their product environmentally and socially more sustainable. It reduces mainly the social cost in almost $1. And in bananas, there has been a study done in fair trade, and we see that costs were reduced almost in $3. So there is a positive impact through standards and sustainability schemes, but external costs are still there because paying below the cost of production really generates negative impact on the environment and people. The next, please. So unequal distribution of value in supply chain, price wars and prices below the cost of productions. And on top of that, and I know we have many Caribbean people in the room, we have climate change. And the Caribbean is one of the regions that is hit very much by climate change. We have floodings, we have drought, we have hurricanes, and we have a growing amount of diseases. So climate change have increased the cost of production, have decreased farmers' productivity, have increased the use of pesticides, have decreased the health and occupational safety of farmers and workers, and also have put many farmers in financial risk and debt. In the Caribbean, in bananas, we know that the cost of climate change is almost $1 bucks. And at the end, climate change, unequal value distribution in supply chains, and price wars and price decreases have heavily affect farmers' income. Next, please. Next, William. So in this reality, Corona hits farmers and workers. The CLAC have done recently in April, the first month that farmers and workers really felt the negative impact of Corona. We've done a survey amongst 331 organizations in Latin America of different regions, different countries, and different products. And definitely what came out of this study is already what has been mentioned by Sarah. It's an increased impact of costs of production have been the major implications. So it has been an increased impact on costs of productions that are already very high, versus no impact at all on prices. So producers and farmers are simply deepening their crisis. It already also have impacted our logistics. Transportations to the port have been more difficult, and also the ports have operated with limited time, so there have been pressure or in the port of where the food is going out, but also on the ports where food were coming in. There has been quite some challenges in picking up the products in the port of consumer countries. Shipments have been less regular as normally. There have been a pressure of containers. We have had the lack of containers, and in many countries we have increased costs, mainly in banana or with regards to refrigeration. Then also there have been an impact on workers and farmers, not only on workers but also on farmers. On farmers, because many of our farmers are over 60, and many of them also have health problems that definitely would mean they should work from home, but In farming, that's not possible. So simply they are under higher risk. But on the workers' side, workers older than 60s and with health problems, farmers have been very conscious and have enabled those workers to stay at home, which have increased the cost of production because farmers are paying workers without really getting the benefit out of the work. There has been an impact on demand. The first week were like crazy weeks because demand rose quite a lot because many families in Europe and the rest of the world were nervous and buying more than usual. Then we felt like the other way around. Europe had a stock, so the demand decreased, and now we're getting more or less back to a stable demand depending on the crop. Banana is doing quite well, but coffee, because of many restaurants and out-of-home coffee shops are closed, coffee have felt some negative impact on the demand. On the other side, whole retail sales have pushed up. There also have been impact on the production processes because farmers were forced to work less hours. In the case of bananas, we are working more days because harvest is on a weekly basis. And there is a negative impact because of certain stress and fear amongst workers and farmers themselves to getting sick. And finally, there's quite some pressure on financial costs because many farmers have need now access to finance, and it's very difficult to get access to finance during the coronavirus because many banks also are closed and working from home. And on the other hand, many farmers have debts to pay, and due to less income, they are less able to pay the banks on the loans they had taken due to climate change and other farming needs. Next, please. So if we see what farmers have been able to do, even in these very difficult times and in times where many of farmers are in survival modes, the collective measures taken are maintain distance, supplying protection equipment, amongst other face masks. We have enabled older people and people with health problems to work from home. We are supplying food to those farmers, workers, and communities where we feel food safety is at stake. We are supplying soap and disinfect working areas, and we educate quite a lot of farmers and workers how best to prevent and that they get sick because sick farmers wouldn't have income for their families, and reduce the workforce wherever possible, and definitely because of time that we are allowed to work in our countries due to governmental measures, we work less hours a day, but more days a week. Next, please. Next, William. So just a small idea about how strong is the impact. And you won't understand the numbers, but if you see, this is the real cost of coronavirus on banana production. This is 7%, the cost of production have increased in average, if we take into account the different countries, 7%. And this means 78 cents a box. And you would say, what is this a lot? If it's not, if you see that during the last 3-4, banana prices have decreased more or less in $2 a box. Instead of an increase, now this 78 cents a box means almost a 33% of decrease more in prices that already are falling in farmers' income due to prices that are falling. Next, please. So what about the post-coronavirus? personally believe we will face a lot of challenges because it's crisis plus more crisis, but there are also opportunities because coronavirus have hit the world. It's not just for one reason, one country or one population. Everybody is involved, everybody is risk. So there is an opportunity that the world will learn from this and will change its habits and its way to produce, trade, and consume food. We also have seen that coronavirus have had a positive income on the environment, which is an opportunity we can learn from. And if we see the UN program, environmental program, we definitely can see that the environment have, and the bad management of the environment have a negative impact on diseases as corona, because the transmission of diseases by animals to humanity definitely are caused because of environmental issue and unbalanced nature, deforestation, incentive in agriculture, but also climate change have really increased the risk of diseases like corona. So a way to mitigate future corona or other diseases is to manage the environment in a more responsible way. And sustainable farming should be a priority for farming post-corona, but it should also be a priority for consumers to demand and for businesses to invest in. We need to increase our biodiversity. Monoculture really is not the way we can keep on farming. So we need crop diversifications and added value to make sure producers are able to catch more value of the supply chain. We need to grow local and global market participation. We expect that in the post-coronavirus, all countries will increase local consumption versus global consumption. This is an opportunity and a risk at the same time for many farmers in the South. It's an opportunity because there is a high potential in southern markets for growing ethical markets, being it organic, being it fair trade. So there is an opportunity to increase sustainable markets in the South that we should make best use of, and we should work with our governments to build this kind of markets. But there's also independence on global markets. So what Sarah already said, we need a combination of local and global markets, which require crop diversification on the farmers. So they produce food, they produce for local market, and they keep on producing for global markets. A balanced mix of crops on the farm is very important, not only for farmers' income, not only for climate change mitigation, because sometimes one crop is hit by climate change and another not, but it's also very, very important for a balanced ecosystem. A balanced mix of farm crops on the farm can create a natural balance, nutrient balance in the soil, which decrease the dependency of farmers on external inputs. And finally, we need to introduce climate-friendly technologies to improve soil health, productivity, and decrease dependency on external inputs, reduce water use, cost of productions, and level farmers' income, because farmers' income depends partly on what we can capture out of the value chain, but also we need to reduce the cost of farming and decrease farmers' dependency on external inputs and enable farmers to sell in more than one market. to make sure that all the action together strengthen farmers' position in local and global markets, and secure that family farming is a sustainable option for current and future generation. So next slide, please. William. Now, these are just some pictures on the experience we already have, and it's also a way to invite farmers to walk away from monoculture and really balance their farming in a way that we can achieve this kind of healthy farm you see here. You see banana farmers with more than one crop, and we see the coffee farm, healthy soil, food safety, and also we can mix farming with poultry, honey production, or any other mix of activities that increase farmers' income and enable farmers to have a decent livelihood. Next, please. So the post-COVID consumption also will need farmers and consumers to be more connected. There is a need that consumers trust farmers, feel the food they buy is safe, is healthy, but there's also a need that farmers understand better consumers' expectations. So connecting farmers and workers around the world with consumers and businesses is a way to build trust and mutual understanding. It's also a way to enable the development and growth of local markets and ethical consumption in the South. We can learn from each other, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn and we can communicate better the impact of another way of producing, trading, and consuming our products. We can build also stronger, more direct and transparent, traceable and long-term commercial relationship. Direct here is very important because current supply chains are long supply chain and value is getting lost. So if we could build more direct relationship, built on trust, built on transparency, built on traceability, between farmers, businesses, and consumers, this is a way to channel more value into production. Digital tools also enable farmers to influence consumer behavior by creating awareness around the negative impact of low prices on people and the environment. And finally, digital tools enable farmers to evidence their social and environment impact of family farming, not just for farmers, also for local communities, for food safety, and for the achievement of the SDGs. So at the end, digital tools will give voice and power to the ones that operate in silence, are threatened in their existence, and have proven to be the unsung heroes of local and global economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marike. This was really inspiring and very interesting presentation. So I would encourage the participants, please, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. But then, of course, we will have an open Q&A session in the end. And yes, we mentioned at the beginning that it will be a 1 hour webinar, but of course, information that's being shared is very interesting. So we will maybe try to finish 15 minutes later. But, and yes, I would like to thank the 74 participants that now we have online in the chat. So I encourage you to put your questions or comment in the chat while we go to the open session of Q&A in the end. So now I will hand over to Sarah to have an interaction section with Josephine Francis. 1 second. And while I prepare that, let me launch the third poll. And then it's basing on what Marike says. What are the short-term resilience strategies that you think we will take now after COVID? So I have launched the poll. So here, what is the strategy to mitigate further the impact and survive in the short term? So we have 5 responses: ensure food security and protect health. We need more policy response. We need more public-private alliances, partnerships, renegotiate the terms of the bankers and buyers, and of course, empower the farm associations, which, as we said, are the unsung heroes today. Yeah, so. Let me also unmute Josephine Francis. Okay, good. So I see the responses coming in. So please, if you can answer the poll, what is the best strategy to mitigate further the impact and survive in the short term? Ensure food security and protect health, policy response, public-private partnerships, renegotiate terms with bankers and buyers, and empower farmer associations. So I see a lot of results, so I will end the poll now and share the results. And I hand over the floor to Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah, please.
Thank you, William. So I'd like to thank Josephine Francis from the Farmers Union Network in Liberia. First of all, thank you for informing our report. She was one of our key interviewees, and thank you for supporting us once again by sharing your experiences. Josephine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, hi. So my first question is, can you tell us about the role policy and farmers associations respectively play in building resilience to shocks such as COVID-19, both at emergency level and further down the line?
I want to first extend my greetings to everyone on this platform. And I also want to say thank you to ITC for giving us the opportunity to participate in this global platform. Liberia is going through some difficult times right now, and especially our smallholder producers. We are part of a regional farmers organization called ROPA, and ROPA have also organized a watch and action committee in the 15 ECOWAS countries. And we presently collaborating with actors from the CSOs and the value chains, because the farmers in West Africa is going through a difficult time. And I will talk mostly on Liberia. Liberia depends on importation of food. So even our staple food, we need like 400 metric tons of rice a year. We have to bring that in. And with the crisis today, the farmers are lack of food, and children are suffering from malnutrition. So with our regional organization, we were able to get some resources from donors. So presently, Farmers Union are in all the rural areas of Liberia, carrying food and hygiene materials to our farmers. We're now going through the rainy season, and knowing how it's difficult and the climate change, farmers trying to grow their own rice, but it's very difficult, and rice will not be ready until the next 3 months. So what are we doing? Most of our smallholder farmers do not only depend on food crops, they depend on cash crops like rubber and coffee and cocoa. And as we going through this difficult time, Firestone, who's the largest company in Liberia to purchase rubber, is no longer purchasing rubber from the smallholder farmers. So they are having serious financial crisis. And government have put in place an emergency agenda for COVID-19. And the emergency agenda is food security, and that is headed by the Minister of Agriculture. Food security had to use subsidy to provide livelihoods for the people. We're not talking about trades, making sure that we invest more into cash crop and also trying to do policy reforms for the agricultural sector. And there are a lot going on. So how can they do it? How can we handle all of this? But the farmers in Liberia are resilient, but 95% of the farmers are subsistence farmers. And they depend on the rubber, they depend on the cocoa tree, so they don't grow one thing. So now we training the farmers how to do agroforestry. This season is the season to grow cash crop. So with all the nursery, with cocoa and coffee, we are now showing them how to do agroforestry. The short-term additional seeds have been used, so farmers able to make some quick impact on their income. And we also making sure that Farmers Union is going organic. The farmers are going organic, teaching them how to build organic, because fertilizer is very expensive, which is about $62. And we were able to carry seeds, like short-term seeds, like maize and cucumber and tomato seeds, so they can be able to have income in 90 days. And the price of food in Liberia right now is very, very expensive. ECOWAS is having a conversation on how to open the borders to Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, because all those borders have been shut down. And that's where our livestock come from. That's where we get most of our seeds from. So since it's not accessible to us, we are now using the indigenous seeds that will be able to give the farmers income right away. And we're also working with FAO. FAO is doing very well for the farmers in Liberia, establishing fishery, working with rice production, and working with vegetable production, so they can be able to have some income in the next 90 days. Our value chain is going to be the value chain is now working together to make sure that the value chain have a collective act to face the COVID-19, because COVID-19 is not like what we experienced during the Ebola. During the Ebola, with 3 countries in West Africa. But with the COVID-19, it's the entire world. So that is really challenging for the Liberian economy. Our economy was already hurting after the Ebola. We have not recovered. So now it is very difficult. And having a new government, having a new Minister of Agriculture, we all trying to work together to make sure that how we can produce food for our country, how our farmers can be sustainable, how our cash crop of coffee, cocoa can be exported. Just few months ago, a month and a half ago, before they started shipping cocoa abroad. So it's very difficult at this time for the farmers in Liberia and in West Africa. Okay, I will stop here with your first question. Hello?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you, Josephine. Okay. Thank you. You replied really comprehensively, actually, to some of my next questions. It's really, I mean, we can see that there's a lot of responsibility that falls on the farmer associations to really support their farmers, but it's also encouraging to hear that it's not all gloom and doom, and that the crisis is also opening up some policy response that would be positive whether or not there's COVID-19. So this is encouraging. I think you addressed my 3 questions pretty well. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more in the final question about the importance of alliances for building resilient strategies and long-term growth? Do you feel like you've addressed that sufficiently?
I can address that a little more. The COVID-19 pandemic, let me emphasize on the COVID-19 pandemic and compare it to the Ebola crisis that we had in 2014 to 2016. And presently, the COVID-19, we have only confirmed cases, less than 300 people. Comparing to the Ebola, we have 4,000. And Liberia were not ready for the Ebola crisis. But when it came to the COVID-19, from the experience and building capacity, the government were able to put measures in place. And also the government immediately locked down the capital city. There were no movement for the first month of the coronavirus through the country. So there were no movement, and farmers could not move from one area to another. So farmers could not even go on the farms. And they set a state of emergency, which was like at 3 o'clock, everybody had to be home. We are still going through the state of emergency, but they put it out to 6 o'clock in the evening. So at 6 o'clock in the evening, we have a state of emergency curfew that nobody can leave. So the farmers now have been trained to go back to the farms. They are on the farms practicing all the protocols, social distancing, wearing masks, not drinking out of the same cup. And it's unfortunate the Liberia healthcare is very fragile, which we still need to work on. So we are listening keenly to WHO and the CDC Africa, whatever they ask us to do, that's what we are doing. And we hope that the numbers will not go up. But now the trade situation is very difficult for the coffee and the cocoa exporters, because now they have not relaxed the tariff on the export of cocoa and coffee. So the private sector is talking to government to try to relax the export of cocoa and coffee, because most of the smallholder farmers that in this sector have tied up their finances to be able to harvest, process the cocoa, sell it to the exporter, and exporter have a short-term loan. So it's very difficult, but the Liberian people, again, I would say, are resilient, and we are working with our government to make sure that we can immediately put a policy in place that will protect the smallholder farmers, and to make sure that we have food security, because food security insecurity is growing every day during the COVID-19, and that is very worrisome for the Liberian people. And also we have the increasing of slow economy. The inflation is very bad. So we hope that the airports were announced that the airport will soon be resuming, and we're trying to see how we can get Ghana and Ivory Coast to start opening their airports to Liberia, because with the sanction going on and the airports and the free port closed down, if this don't come back together in the next 3 months, it will be very difficult for the farmers, our economy, and the population of this country.
Yes, I can imagine. Thank you, Josephine. Fantastic. It's great for the people listening here from the Caribbean region to get some perspective from another region, from another country. So thank you for sharing your experience from Liberia. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you again, Ms. Josephine. This was very, very interesting, and also applies very much to the situation in the Caribbean that we live so far. So I will launch the fourth poll and the last poll, and this more about the post-COVID recovery in the midterm. So we have 2 questions. That's the last time. So what will be the first priority for recovery in the midterm? And we have diversify production, products and markets to better compete, support climate smart resilient systems, reduce the cost of doing business and improve efficiency and competitiveness, support digitalization, public-private collaboration alliances to unlock investments. So what do you think will be the first and second priority for recovery in the midterm? And while we get the answers, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Barton Clark. He's the Executive Director of CARDI. He's our year partner for the project implementation of coconut industry development in the Caribbean, funded by the European Union and in partnership with the CARIFORUM Secretariat. And also, I had some very interesting questions in the chat. Well, the first one is if the results of the poll will be available. Yes, we will share them. We'll share the results, the summary results with the presentations and the link for the video. And then very interesting one from Richard Rampersad, then for reflection. Is any country in the world fully food secure? I would like to see a model to follow in the Caribbean. Very interesting one. And then Brian Lee saying, congratulations, Marike. And of course, I know Josephine for the presentation. Yes, so please, I encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And then we go to the Q&A session at the end. So let me just end the poll now and share the results while I give the word to Mr. Barton Clark. Good morning, Barton. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning, colleagues across the world. Thank you very much for the opportunity and so on to speak to you about circumstances in the Caribbean. A lot of the issues that were raised by the previous speakers are grounded also in the experience of the Caribbean. There have been the disruptions, supply chain disruptions. There have been shortages of labor. There have been issues associated with the closure of the tourism sector. They have had our response to coronavirus mitigated in some extent by the existence of a chronic drought. In fact, the predictions from our Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology is that the drought that is currently being experienced, which would have resulted in about 60 or 70% in thing of the loss of the corn crop in Belize in recent times, and also restrictions in terms of the utilization of water, public water for agricultural purposes. So the impact of climate change is exacerbating the impact of coronavirus across the Caribbean. The next slide, please. So the food security question for the Caribbean is one where we are net importers of food, generally speaking, across the Caribbean, importing in excess of $5.5 billion worth of food across all of the Caribbean. There is some light at the end of the tunnel, however, because Guyana and Belize, in particular, are relatively a lot more assured of their food supply from domestic sources. There are important lessons to be learned from their experiences relative to the rest of the Caribbean. The rest of the Caribbean, being mostly very, very small islands, are constrained, of course, by the limited land space, limited population, limited labor force, very high cost of energy, the very, very high cost of labor. The economies are dominated by and large by tourism sector and to some extent by the energy sector. Trinidad and Tobago, one thing being the example of that. So we're net food importers, and in addition to being net food importers, most of what we consume are processed, and this in itself has a negative impact upon our food security from the perspective that we've seen extraordinarily high levels of chronic non-communicable diseases in the Caribbean. That even now, as we even look at the response mechanism to the question of COVID-19, where we would have had a run on supermarkets across the region. And of course, the foods that people would have been buying are the non-perishable stuff, which essentially I think are inundated with fairly high levels of sugar and salt, and that would contribute in a negative way to the issues of chronic non-communicable diseases, which are having an impact to the tune of $200–300 million per year on the economies and so on in the Caribbean. All right, next slide, please. Next slide, please. So what has the Caribbean done to help to mitigate this matter? Firstly, there's under the CARICOM mechanism a series of task forces that have been established and to help drive the implementation of CARICOM strategic plan. And one such mechanism is the Cluster for Food and Agriculture and Nutrition, which is chaired by CARDI and including a number of the other regional institutions such as the Caribbean Agriculture, Health and Food Safety Agency, the Caribbean Disaster Management Agency, as well as some representation from the national governments, the universities, University of West Indies, University of Guyana, University of Trinidad and Tobago, the Farmers Network, the Caribbean Farmers Network, the Caribbean Agribusiness Association, and the FAO and the ICA are also part of this mechanism. So we started to mobilize and so on in very, very early February, and out of that, we developed a response framework, which was then approved by the ministers of agriculture, and subsequently, we then developed an action plan, which was put before the Conference of Heads of Governments in April, and that too has been approved, and we are pursuing implementation thereof. We have the formation of a food security task force, where we have each member state has identified somebody whom we can lean on to get information to promote action. Each of the member states have come up with a plan, an action plan to address food security issues. And there's been some assistance provided in developing that action plan. We're developing a trade platform. That trade platform, actually, there was a meeting on last Monday. There's an existing platform which is being modified and adjusted very, very quickly. But in the meantime, we put in the hands of each of the member states a thing which would allow them to identify what are the commodities that they have in good supply, what are the products they have in good supply, like commodities and products, and also what they need. And a number of the countries have responded, and this could be trying to facilitate the movement of some of that from those areas of high quantities to those areas where there are some shortages. So we have been looking at the infrastructure that is required, storage and stuff and so on. We are looking at the issues of financing. Yesterday there was a meeting of the ministers of agriculture of CARICOM with the assorted donor agencies, the World Bank, the IMF, the IDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, etc., and the IFAD, and looking at what are the possibilities with respect to the mobilization of additional resources for investment in the sector. In the meantime, the governments have all come up with some seed money, seed capital, $10 million in St. Kitts, $200 million in Jamaica, that would help to facilitate, one, assisting the government in buttressing the market for the farmers by providing them with access to the market, providing them with additional access to the storage capacity that, say, in Trinidad and Tobago, the NAMDEVCO has cold storage facilities, and they have been made available to the farmers community. Facilitating investment in agro-processing in Jamaica, where they had a surplus of tomatoes, and they've been able to get the manufacturing of a local drink from tomatoes. So these are the kinds of responses and things that are taking place across all of the countries. The actions have been divided into what we're doing immediately, what we're doing in the medium term, and what we're doing in the long term. So we can then look at the succeeding side, so I can pick up one or two things to present to you, bearing in mind until the time constraint that we have. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's some policy intervention where we looked at what are the actions and what are the objectives. We're trying to remove the facilitating, and this has already happened, each member state in identifying the priority sectors that are part of the emergency services. The agricultural sector was identified that would allow, I think, the farmers as well as their workers to continue to support the food production initiatives. The purchasing of excess food that I would have alluded to earlier. You see, like in the case of Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Belize, with the closure of the tourism sector, and note that in the case of poultry, the Caribbean produces 80% of the poultry that is consumed in the Caribbean. So with and much of that is tabled in the hotel sector. So with the closure of the hotel sector, then we had this big issue now with this surplus of poultry meat and whatever. So that in case of Barbados, they are proposing and so on a 2-month restriction on imports from outside of the region to allow the excess product and thing to be distributed. They've also have significant increases in the amount that is in cold storage and the like. Putting in place support systems for the farmers, because note that the economies have, the tourism sector contributes anywhere between 30% and 90% to a number of the economies in the Caribbean. So with the closure of the hotels, loss of work, we are seeing in Barbados, for example, that about a third of the workforce and things have been applying to the national insurance scheme and thing for benefits. So that it means too that there is a reduction in the amount of cash available within the circulating in the system to facilitate growth in the economy, and even obviously I think for people and things to be able to take care of themselves. So all of the governments have chipped in and have put in place mechanisms to supply some cash transfers and things to the farmers as well as the wider population to help support. Strengthening research and development. Key to this is the fact that the heads of governments have decided that that it is high time that the Caribbean pays far greater attention to food security as a long-term strategy and not allow the cessation of the COVID-19 issues when that arises to derail the initiatives with respect to food security. And therefore, it is anticipated that there will be some more significant investments in research and development for technology purposes. And key here would be using information and communication technologies to help drive improvements in efficiency of operations at the level of the farms, as well as the farmers and the others who are supporting the sector. Increasing production, all the plans that have come from the respective governments speak about increasing production. With particular reference and so on to the vegetables and the root crops, not only therefore contributing to the national food basket, but also contributing and thing to helping to mitigate the impact of the chronic non-communicable diseases. What we have to deal with, however, are the more big ticket items which will necessitate some cross-border investments under the aegis of the Caribbean single market and economy that will allow us then to make investments in the land spaces that we have in Belize and Jamaica and Guyana and Haiti and Suriname to help feed the rest of the Caribbean, to help drive agro-industry in the rest of the Caribbean, taking advantage and of the relatively lower cost energy that happens in Trinidad, to help increase, therefore, the supply of food from within the Caribbean. But at the same time, dealing with mitigating the impact of the non-tariff barriers, which is currently a constraint and thing to the movement of goods. Part of that would be greater investments in transportation. One of the suggestions that has come, one of the things that's been put before the heads of government is how do we leverage the regional air carriers in order to be able to move produce around the region to help to deal with this matter. We note that in response to this, that the Caribbean Airlines has started a cargo service, and there is a private airline out of St. Vincent that has also initiated a cargo service. Deepening the arrangement with the private sector. Key here is that there's a new private sector organization was established by the Conference of Heads of Governments last July, and they did a presentation to the heads of governments in February this year, in which they are committed to assisting the governments in reducing Caribbean food import bill by 25% by 2025. They've identified a number of commodities. They've also identified a number of public sector investments that will be required in order to facilitate their investments to help to meet this particular challenge. So the Food and Agriculture Nutrition Cluster, chaired by CARDI, has had meetings with the private sector group. We have their plans. We know what the opportunities exist, and therefore there are going to be some significant effort now required to arrive at the necessary business cases that will facilitate the improvements and so on in investments by the private sector, as well as at the same time looking at treating with how do we improve the business environment that will facilitate greater investment. How do we improve investments in crop insurance? How do we look at risk capital supporting the agricultural endeavor given the kind of inherent risk, and how do we treat with that? Next slide, please. Right, I would have alluded to the sustainable financing actions already, and so there's already action being taken on that. Next slide, please. And just let me thank you very much, Unsung, for listening to a very short presentation on what has been the Caribbean's response, and I'm very, very open to any questions of clarification that you require. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barton Clark. A lot of important points have been said today, including income diversification, multi-market, multi-approach. For the Caribbean, we have had a great impact on tourism. Basically, we have stopped tourism in the region, so we have a lot of excessive production. We have heard many of the real impact from farmers in the Latin America and the Caribbean, and also in the West Africa. But then also we find that there are many opportunities. And of course, that the Caribbean network and regional institutions are doing as much as possible to target those challenges. So as promised, now we will lead up to the last session. We try to make it short, and apologies for extending a bit from the time. So if anybody want to say something or ask a question, if they can please raise their hand, and I would open the mic. In the meantime, I can read the questions from the chat. Okay, I think Marike already addressed the question from Brian. So please, if somebody has any questions or comments, I will encourage them to click the raise hand in their name. They can click raise hand to ask a question or make a comment. Do we have any questions, comments?
Just to clarify, because it's not so straightforward for me, to raise your hand, you just click on the participants icon, and then the raise hand option pops up.
Or if you have difficulties, put it on the chat, and I would unmute your mic directly.
No questions.
I think everything was clear, and they have very interesting information. Okay, so just to say again that this session plus the presentations and the survey results, they will be uploaded in CARDI's and ITC website on the Coconut project. So we would like to thank you, million of thanks to our partners, especially to the European Union for funding this initiative, the CARIFORM Secretariat, and of course our valuable partners of CARDI. Thank you, Marike from Dominican Republic, Banelino, and CLAC, the Latin America Network of Farmers Unions. Also, Josephine from Liberia, thank you for joining us and share your experience with our Caribbean network. And of course, just to announce that next week on Tuesday, we have also another webinar with JAMPRO. This one will be on food trends, so it will be very interesting. So now that we have experienced a huge loss in the market, and we have seen from the results of the survey in COVID, what we have here, that some of the logistics have been very affected. How are the markets reacting to this? So we will have a lot of insights from our colleague Cristina Rennie. She's from the hospitality sector. So, and also from JAMPRO. How are the companies in Jamaica specifically and the region have been reacting to this new reality of COVID? So I'm sharing my screen with the flyer for the next webinar. This will be Tuesday. We will share also by email the link to register. So if we don't have any more questions, Sarah, over to you, just to show any final words.
No, thank you. I mean, it was great to see so many people attending. It was really interesting to hear the other presentations. And of course, I remind you that if you would like to go and read the report that covers all these things we talked about today, including the perspectives of the people who presented today, you can just go to the link which I provide in the presentation that we'll be sharing with you all after this session. Or you can go in the publication section of the International Trade Center website. That's it for me.
Well, great. Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, and I hope you have a very good weekend. Please keep staying safe. And it was a pleasure for us having you here, and we look forward to see you in the next webinar on Tuesday to talk about food trends. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah,